Evaluating education. With the legislative session over, summer quickly approaching, we're going to take a look at efforts to support school districts across the state. Hello and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm Syed in Albany. New York's public school districts front and center this week. We're reviewing the resources and considerations provided by the state during the legislative session. Here's a look at some of the main takeaways from the Capitol when it comes to our classrooms. State budget offering $2.1 billion in new school aid. That includes a 3% minimum boost in foundation aid for each district. The state also continuing the pause for teacher and principal evaluations in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. The state has most recently passed new legislation providing enhanced charges for those who make violent threats against school districts. Now, while those are some of the big pushes to support our schools, a new report finding many districts still falling short when it comes to mental health training for school staff. Empire State Weekly's Jamie DeLine taking us through the details of the Comptroller's assessment.
An audit sampling of 20 school districts found 18 of them either did not offer mental health training for staff, or if they did, lacked some of the recommendation components suggested by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
They talk about anxiety, they talk about behavior problems, they talk about eating disorders, about mood, about personality, about trauma and stress. So these are areas that should be focused in on, should be kept conscious by staff and reported if there is an issue.
Of the 20 districts, only Burnt Hills, Ballston Lake, and Canandaigua City offered training with all 12 components.
We were extremely proud of the fact that of our trainings, we've been focusing on our trainings for the last several years. And so that was a success. One of our areas where we needed improvement was getting our trainings done in a timely manner. And we were, as far as it was due by the 15th of September, and we didn't quite meet that.
This isn't a condemnation of any district. This is a call to action. Hey, you can do better. Here's some of the areas that we recognize as your blind spots, as areas that need improvement.
According to the report, most school district officials told auditors that the pandemic caused them to focus their attention on returning students to school safely for in-person learning, which impacted the school's ability to provide timely mental health training. Auerbach says it's important for everyone to work together to address this issue.
And when I say work together, that includes state ed, that includes NYSBA, the New York State Board of Education. That includes our office and anyone that really has a stake in the game to work together to move this forward and to hopefully improve. So the next time we come back as a follow-up to this, that we will be pretty much near 100% when we take a look at these 20 districts.
Reporting in Albany, I'm Jamie DeLine.
And joining us now to review how these districts fared during the legislative session this year, Brian Fessler, the Director of Governmental Relations for the New York State School Board Association. Brian, we thank you for your time today. We know you've been very busy with all of this. I want to get right into the questions. School safety, of course, on the minds of so many right now. First, though, I want to get to that additional funding packed into the state budget. Had a couple of months, really, at this point to digest it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we were fortunate this year within the state budget to have a relatively healthy and significant increase in school aid, a total of about $2.1 billion, and most notable for our school districts within that package. The budget included year 2 of a 3-year phase-in plan for foundation aid, which is the main operating aid for school districts. And so that healthy budget really allowed us within the school community and at the School Boards Association in particular to focus on other outstanding legislation that's been floating around for a few years during this last half of session, the last couple months, once the legislature returned from their post-budget break. So that strong budget, as I said, really allowed us to focus on some additional priorities that allow our school boards and our school districts to best educate and serve their students and their communities.
We'll get to some of those priorities in a minute. Brian, we've heard that famous stat time and time again. New York, of course, spending more money per student than any other state in the country. We know it's not a one-to-one on results, but with this funding, how are districts going to be utilizing this to improve the educational experience and outcomes for their students?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, whenever I hear that stat, I always kind of think of the word invest rather than spend. I'm proud to be a resident of a state that invests at the level it does for students and our school districts. And this package and this level of funding in particular this year, I think allows school districts to focus on the short term and long term. The short term, obviously, is kind of pulling out of and hopefully kind of reforming and improving and building upon the educational services that we provide our students coming out of the pandemic. The current economic climate and environment that we're in, obviously dealing with higher than usual inflation, and so in the short term, these funds, both at the state level and some of the federal stimulus funds, allows our districts to come out of that, hopefully, and address areas of increased need as a result of the pandemic. So whether it's learning gaps, as districts shifted between virtual and hybrid learning, and then obviously mental health challenges that our students and staff within our districts are facing. And beyond that, in the long term, these funding categories and allowances really create opportunities. And so it allows school districts to look at those areas of need for the next generation of students and make those investments within the classroom to best educate and serve our students. So as I said, a significant amount of money between state and federal dollars, but it really creates a lot of opportunities for our school districts. And that means there's more work to be done to take advantage of those opportunities.
Brian, you mentioned you got that funding locked in so early, it allowed you to pursue other legislation that would further education in the state. What were some of those items that you were focused on to get accomplished?
Yeah, one of those items, obviously, we've been hearing about and dealing with a school bus driver shortage. Unfortunately, for a number of years now, that's been exacerbated by some of the broader staff shortages from the pandemic. So there's a bill that deals with the permit periods for commercial learners or commercial driver's license permits to match that permit timeframe with the federal standard. And really what that does is hopefully increase the opportunity and increase the potential pool for bus driver candidates. So a small bill like that, but that we think can make a meaningful difference both in the short term and the long term. There was a package of bills that deal with some reforms and transparency and dialogue, required communications between school districts and local governments and industrial development agencies, the entities that enter into pilot agreements, payments in lieu of taxes for the purpose of economic development. Those agreements obviously have a significant impact on property taxes, school property taxes in particular. And so we have been traditionally supportive of an increase in communication and dialogue between school districts and IDAs, industrial development agencies, to kind of improve that relationship between those two entities. So a few bills dealing with that we are pleased to see pass this year that we've been working on for a number of years.
Now, Brian, before we get to the break here in just a minute or so, I want to talk about safety. It's on the minds of so many people here. The gun reform package bill that was passed, it enhanced those penalties against those who make threats against schools. Looking at the funding aspect of this, anything in that funding that can be put towards enhancing school safety as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. So on the bill that you noted, there was the establishment of a new crime, and that bill was signed into law about a week ago or so by the governor as part of a broader gun violence and gun control package. Usually we don't engage on those issues too much, kind of outside of our direct scope. But this is an issue, those threats of mass harm or threats of mass violence made against schools and other public places. It's something we've talked about for a number of years as we saw a gap in existing statute in terms of the type of threats of violence. So we are very pleased to see that bill included within the package that the legislature passed and the governor signed. And yeah, I think, especially with the unfortunate events in Buffalo and Texas over the past few weeks, I think you're probably going to see a renewed interest from school districts in some of those school safety measures. We always talk about the importance of resources and local control and options for our districts. Some districts will pursue some of those school facility or school building hardening initiatives. Some districts will look at school resource officers, and some school districts may feel that the best way to address some of those challenges is through mental health services or some combination thereof. And so, that's one of those opportunities that I mentioned, that a significant school funding package between state and federal dollars allows districts to take a look at to see what might be the best fit for their school communities.
And something we'll continue to follow here on Empire State Weekly. Brian Fessler with the New York State School Board Association. Thanks so much for your time. We do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, protecting reproductive rights while also researching reproductive health. Coming up, we are going to sit down with the Department of Health to review a new report on maternal mortality. And welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Solomon Syed in Albany. Ever since the leaked Supreme Court draft decision indicating the court could overturn Roe versus Wade this month, there's been a renewed focus on protecting reproductive rights in the state. A legislature just passing additional measures to protect New Yorkers at the end of the session. The state also trying to shore up reproductive health in general. The Department of Health releasing the first report from the Maternal Mortality Review Board. Joining us now is the Department of Health's Deputy Director Joanne Moore to dig further into this report and ongoing efforts at the state. Joanne, we really appreciate your time today. This is an exhaustive 92-page report, really impossible to cover all the findings in just a few minutes here, but there are some things that really jumped out. For one, more than half of pregnancy-related deaths, those happened within 6 weeks of pregnancy. Joanne, given the advances in care, that's an alarming number.
Absolutely. And first, let me just say thank you for the opportunity to join this discussion. It is an alarming number. You're absolutely right. And so based on that and based on the commitment that the Department of Health has as it relates to making sure we address inequities as well as address the complications and the concerns that we have provided evidence to in the report, we've taken a series of steps to move forward. And most importantly, we've partnered with members of the community who have both professional and lived experience to help us understand what really needs to be prioritized moving forward.
Joanne, we see that some of the leading causes of pregnancy-related death, they include embolisms and hemorrhages, those, of course, physical conditions. But then you look at mental health. That's the third leading cause in this cohort. How do you tackle that issue? Because it's just so hard to quantify in some cases.
The first step, number one, is identifying what the needs are for the individual that's sitting in front of you. And so recognizing what was found within the report, I think that there are a number of things that need to happen. Number one, we need to ensure that the providers who are caring for individuals who are pregnant and giving birth, that they have the tools and the resources they need to make sure that their discussions are providing information so that patients can make informed decisions, whether that's regarding use of referrals or resources as it relates to mental health, but also helping identify and normalize the fact that there may be feelings or experiences that are being had through a pregnancy that can be supported and can be relieved at the same time. I think in general, when we talk about mental health, we still have a lot of work to do in helping normalize the conversation, decrease stigma as it relates to mental health, and work towards making it a normal, natural part of our medical appointments. So while we're prioritizing physical care, we're also prioritizing the needs that we may have related to our mental health.
You know, you talk about those appointments and making this part of regular treatment. You look at the other alarming stat in this study, 78% of these deaths, they were preventable. You talk about items that the Department of Health is pursuing to prevent this from continuing. What are some of those measures?
Sure. So I think the first thing is making sure that individuals have access to care. So getting into care, getting care and support from a provider or a provider system that you can feel confident in and you can feel safe and supported in is key. Making sure that we create environments where from the point of entry to the point of exits, people can feel that they have a space in which they can present whatever needs they have so that there can be resources and referrals given to them. I think also we have to make sure that we're starting out early as possible in a pregnancy for people to start receiving care and address whatever outstanding issues may be present throughout that pregnancy. The more we get to know our provider, the more we're able to partner in our care moving forward.
Now, Joanne, this study also finding that Black women 5 times more likely to die than their white peers. In some cases, 46% of deaths can be attributed to discrimination. How do we address the continuing inequity in these outcomes?
So, as you may be familiar, in New York State, we've declared racism to be a public health crisis. And what we found through the report, which is also alarming, is that discrimination has played a part in many of the unintended or untoward outcomes that happen for individuals who are pregnant and or giving birth. And so we have to continue to work to remove the inequities from our systems of care. We have to identify and be transparent about the areas that we need to work on for us to get to a place where the spaces that we're supposed to be providing care and support to individuals are in a place that they can serve all individuals. So when we talk about the issues of racism, inequity, health disparities, it's a continued discussion around, one, making sure that individuals have the social determinants of health that they need in order to have the highest quality of health and the highest satisfaction of life. And two, it's about making sure that providers are aware of and responding to and working towards reducing and eliminating their own at times discriminatory thoughts or stigmas. Sometimes we're not aware of how the experiences we personally bring into the discussion may impact how we view other people sitting in front of us. Other times we're in a situation in which we really need to think about the culture of our practice, and in this example, medical practices, so that we work with individuals without assumption, without stigma, and without discrimination.
Such important information there. Joanne Moore, Deputy Director with the State Department of Health. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
We've discussed the measures taken here in New York to enhance gun laws. Coming up, a look at how New York's congressional members voted on recent federal legislation aimed at the rise in violence. Turning now to the latest in the Buffalo supermarket shooting, where this week in Washington, the son of one of the victims speaking with lawmakers at a hearing on domestic terrorism. Garnell Whitfield Jr., the son of Ruth Whitfield, speaking about the impact his mother had on the community that is right up until her life was taken on May 14th. Authorities filing domestic terrorism and hate crime charges against the 18-year-old shooting suspect. Whitfield calling on senators to take action on white supremacy and address the racist theories cited by the suspected shooter.
This was an act of a person, and he did not act alone. He was radicalized by white supremacists. His anger and hatred were metastasized like a cancer by people with big microphones in high places screaming that black people were going to take away their jobs and opportunities. My mother's life mattered. My mother's life mattered. And your actions here today will tell us how much it matters to you.
Whitfield also telling senators he is speaking on behalf of all of the victims who lost their lives and their families. Talks continuing in the Senate after the House passed a sweeping gun reform package. It's called the Protect Our Kids Act, and here's a breakdown of the vote in the House. It passed 223 to 204. Just 2 Democrats voting no on the measure, 5 Republicans voting to approve it. Lawmakers from New York State, they voted along party lines. That is except for Representative Chris Jacobs, the Republican from the Buffalo area, voting yes. Meanwhile, more shakeup in the upcoming congressional elections here in New York. State Republican Party Chairman Nick Langworthy now entering the race in the newly formed 23rd District. 23rd District covering Erie and Genesee counties, the area covered by the current 27th seat, that held by Chris Jacobs. Jacobs not running for re-election. Langworthy saying he intends to stay on as the GOP chair during his campaign. State employees who are not vaccinated against COVID-19 no longer going to be required to be tested for the virus every week. State officials say they are suspending that mandate because of a decline in reported cases in the past 3 weeks. Unvaccinated New Yorkers and workers encouraged, though, to test regularly at home. We're also told to follow the latest isolation guidance from the health department if they test positive. All right, stay with us. We're coming back in a moment with a final look at the week ahead. Meanwhile, if you have a comment or story idea, let us know. You can email Empire State Weekly, and you can also find us on Twitter. All right, looking ahead to next week, a big change on New York's gun laws going into effect. The age to buy assault rifles officially rising from 18 to 21 Monday. It's one of the new rules implemented as part of a 10-bill package passed by lawmakers right at the end of the legislative session. We will, of course, be keeping an eye on compliance and reaction to the new process. Now, from all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I am Solomon Syed in Albany. We'll be seeing you again next week. And don't forget, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over New York State. Here's a full schedule of Empire State Weekly on 10 television stations across New York.